Most often, regarding the things that are similar, is how people in the Arctic deal with nature and how the cultures, how the cultures are regarding living with this harsh nature. The pictures Lilja Vinokurova showed us yesterday of the dead livestock after the floods in Yakutia, I think those pictures will stay with us for a long time. And that could be a very concrete result of climate change. Then we heard about the sky-high rates of suicides in Nunavut, which Jack Hicks presented to us this morning, and then also the clearly different views of the young men and boys in the Faroe Islands, different from the other regions and countries, different views on gender equality, conservative views, if you will, which Fjörus Gaini told us about. There are also huge differences in life expectancy in the Arctic, from the longest life expectancy in the world to the shortest, or among the shortest, as Timothy Heleniak presented this afternoon. Former President of Finland, Tarja Halonen, pointed out to us yesterday that gender equality is a smart investment in the future of human rights. And I think we should not forget that. And she also said that it's never too late to educate people about gender equality and that people are never too old to learn. A good point to keep in mind also. In many of the presentations we've heard, there was focus on the need for more information, more research and data on the situation of women and men in the Arctic. And Kristín Ástgeirsdóttir, she suggested that maybe there should be a gender equality index of the Arctic. I found this to be a very, very interesting suggestion, which I think we should keep in mind and really look into. Gunn-Britt Ritter, she pointed out a few disturbing things. She mentioned all the conferences about the Arctic in recent years, and that the focus there has been mostly on economic development. And she said gender-relevant questions have mostly been left out. Auður Ingólfsdóttir, she asked maybe the question nobody dares to ask, when she said, should we maybe not use the gas and oil resources in the Arctic? This is a very interesting question that needs to be addressed in the context of the Arctic. Auður also mentioned or talked about the masculine and feminine values she has identified regarding discourse about the Arctic, the feminine values being more connected to nature and living with it, and the masculine views and the masculine discourse more on using and even exploiting nature. Natalia Kukurenko from Russia asked if there is such a thing as gender equality in Russia, and she pointed out that to some people there, the notion is that they are tired of gender equality because they had it in the Soviet period and now want to relax a bit. Chris Rockan Iversen, she gave us an example on how people, and in her case women, can use their ever-increasing education and put it to use in the Arctic. She pointed out the ample opportunities if you can open your eyes to them. She talked about the importance of training the human brain, which was a good point. And she said, the future should embrace the educated women. It's crucial for the future of the Arctic. Knowledge-based jobs, both in the private and the public sector, could provide new possibilities for all the northern communities. A few more things I'd like to mention. One of the things that Rasmussen pointed out in his interesting presentation yesterday was the need for recognition of differences in gender-related perception of change. And this theme came up it came up repeatedly. He used the examples of the use of social media and views of women and men about education. He also told us about. Shari Fox Gearheard talked about the different ways men and women observe climate change, and that women are more worried about what happens as the result of the climate change. she gave us the example of the women in Baffin Island, and they said that it's not about climate change, it's about our strength. Women seem to be more aware of the social impacts of climate change, and we need women's leadership and their perspectives and what the communities should be doing in dealing with climate change. And this, to my mind, connects to what Gunhild, Hoogensen and Gjørv talked about this morning regarding security. She said that she had problems with the idea that almost no life does exist if the state is not there. But there are failed states, there are examples of failed states, and people are still surviving, she said. And she said that we see that non-state actors, they work for security in their communities and for their families. Valur Ingimundarson, he pointed out this morning, among other things, that the current situation in the Arctic is characterized both by cooperation and conflict. And this is also something that we have heard repeatedly and should not forget. The last point, me being the lawyer, I want to make is quoting the lawyer Eva Maria Svensson when she said that one very important thing regarding gender issues in the Arctic is lack of knowledge of gender equality obligations, the CEDAW Convention being one of them. But she also said that, and I quote, "Law is not the solution to gender issues in the Arctic." So I'd like to leave you with those points that I picked up. And then to our distinguished panelists, whom you all know, because they have, these are the moderators of 6 of the 7 sessions that we have had during these last 2 days. We have, I will just say their names and one sentence maybe about each one of them before giving them the floor. Next to me is Haukur Ingimundarson. He's a senior scientist at the Stefansson Arctic Institution. Next to him is Níels Einarsson, who is director of the same institute. Then there is Birgir Guðmundsson, a docent or professor at the University of Akureyri. Then we have Shari Fox Gearheard, and she told us about the women in Baffin Island yesterday. And then there is Stephanie Irlbacher-Fox, and she talked about gender equality and political participation in the Northwest Territories in Canada yesterday. And at the end there we have Rasmussen, and he talked to us about gender perspective on path dependency. We are missing, unfortunately, Gunhild, Hoogensen and Gjørv. I think she might have had to catch a plane or something, but I don't know. But to start the discussions, I would like to pose the following questions to the panel, and I would like to ask you to just briefly address your opinions on what I will ask you. So here goes. In your opinion, what are the most important issues regarding gender in the Arctic that have been brought up during these 2 days? And more importantly, where do we go from here? What are the next steps that need to be taken regarding these issues? Haukur, if you will be the first.
Wow. Yes. I thought you were supposed to chair discussions here. This is great, though.
Yeah.
Thank you for the floor.
Oh, sure.
Sure. Okay,
yeah.
That's hard. Okay, too bad that Gunhild is not here, because I wanted to give her a little slap. I'm sorry. I wanted to sort of scold her a little bit for giving the states just a bad rap, for talking so negatively about state-centered discourse. And I think Katrín and Anna recently for mentioning the terms welfare state and also social security, because we have been there's too much negative discussion of state-centered discourse in relation to security. What I think has been missing, and especially in the beginning of yesterday, was to focus on the measures that must be taken is actually to amplify and increase and empower governments and the state to interfere and aid people. And of course, what has become particularly evident today is many people, especially in local small indigenous communities, especially males, are feeling devalued, disempowered, and are under threat. And that has come out very well today. Now, that will take me to, I want to add to that something for Jack Hicks, and that is that in the 1990s, there was, in 80s, there was a high suicide rate in Iceland among young males, and the discussion about it was that kids in suburban Reykjavik were not taken well enough care of. It was a blind spot. Actually, it was the kids from the countryside. You were talking about Iqaluit not being as high suicide rate among people in that, young people, men in that category. Actually, it was the same in Iceland. It was the dangerous road between the rural areas. I lost a lot of my friends. I was very angry about this, that the discussion was not focused on where the problem actually was happening. That is the dangerous road from the rural areas when there was a crisis in agriculture to the town of Húsavík, to Akureyri, to Reykjavik. These were the young men who were dying. So, and that we needed in those days analysis. So this would simply take me to focusing a little bit more on the welfare state, which I think we should celebrate. I think it's very important. It's come out. And Sami feminists told me 10 years ago that if the Sami women were going to gain a majority or at least equality in the Sami parliament of Norway, then there would be no thanks to a strengthened Sami parliament or Sami society. It was actually thanks to Nordic welfare system. Okay? Don't scold me for saying this. This is what she said. And now there are more women, or became more women in the parliament. So what I want to take this is to, I mean, where lies the responsibility, for example, in Canada? If we can admit that actually it has promoted gender equality among the Sami to be part of the Nordic welfare system, then we should support these notions that the federal government in Canada should take similar measures as Quebec is able to do for its region in preventing suicides and making conditions better for men that also, therefore, of course, help women. Last thing, that is that taking us back to Kristín Ásgeirsdóttir's talk, and that is that she was in the parliament from 91 to 99, right, for the Women's Alliance Party, which I voted for in 83 when I could vote, and my grandmother did too, and my mother, we voted for them, and they got a lot of votes, and finally, and the Women's Alliance was premised on the work of two anthropologists, Shirley and Edwin Ardener, who wrote a book called Perceiving Women, portraying women as a muted group in general in many societies, and that we needed that women needed to use some kind of strategic essentialism, ignore whether they're subordinated, subdominant, or whatever class they're in, and focus on their common denominators. So women who work in their home only, or if they work in the professions outside the home, then they have the second and third burden to be also working in the home. That what was needed for society was to make our culture more feminine, to actually bring out the positive values that women have fostered, not because of, but in spite of their oppression, being oppressed. And that this needed to be adopted instead of them performing these caregiving roles and giving life instead of taking life, that the state, now I will use the word state in a positive sense, the state should take responsibility for these values. And so therefore I have no objection when Anna Karlsdóttir talks about, it was of course Auður who was talking about feminine culture in Scandinavia. I mean, even if the Norwegian military tried to kill Gaddafi, that doesn't mean that that's trivial relative to what I'm talking about. It's that it's the welfare state that is critical for us here in terms of this gender equality picture. And then just one last thing, and that is I started, there was a wonderful talk this morning. Þorgerður talked about these mediating persons who would be tricksters or shamans in many cultures, like the mayor of Reykjavik and Jóhanna, who mediate between the male and the female. Now, we don't really experience it like that in Iceland anymore because we have sort of made that transition, so it's accepted and celebrated. But I think in all countries, in all regions of the North, we need these mediators. And if there are regions around us where lesbians and gays feel they have to be excluded and live elsewhere, then the society is missing out on this maybe 10% or 7% of very valuable cultural and social capital that is waiting to return home. And particularly these gender expressions of gender are critical for mediating between the heterosexual males and females, to provide alternative expressions, that make it better understood that you can be in whatever profession you want to be. And by the way, there's nothing uneducated about males going to trade school and becoming carpenters, electricians, and plumbers. What we need is more women going also into the trades. That was just the last point I picked up here at the end.
Thank you, Haukur. And we go on to Níels.
Thank you. I had prepared something which I'm afraid is in sort of chaos, and I'm very upset because I obviously have to address these questions that you pose. Well, no, I do as I'm told. It's I come from a family where my mother was very strong-minded. Actually, I come from a fishing family, and fishing families are universally known for often having a strong head of the household, which is not necessarily the fisherman who is away somewhere, and there's a whole body of literature on strong women in fishing families and fishing communities. Where I come from, for example, most of us boys were named, well, we were called or named after our mothers, not the fathers. So we were Gummi Láru, Bjössi Stínu, etc. It was the woman who was basically the focus of the family in terms of influence, but also power. This is something I also see in the Arctic, and something I think to be celebrated. I also grew up in a community, this fishing village, where I think I had the good luck of having excellent role models in terms of men who were both what you would call strong men. They needed to be strong to be fishermen. It's a dangerous occupation. Especially it used to be a very dangerous occupation. A lot of drama and romance around fishing and seamanship, which is very much part and parcel of Icelandic culture, for example. But they were also gentle and kind. So I was always very confused when I was listening to Icelandic popular media, whether it was songs on the radio or films about life in the fishing villages, because fishermen were always described as sort of insensitive brutes, slightly stupid and prone to drinking and hitting each other. That was not my experience of men I grew up with. Perhaps it's a problem that the Reykjavik cultural filmmaking elite has in terms of its perception of life in the fishing villages rather than actual reality in these communities. But there are cultural differences in Iceland. There are cultural differences across the Arctic. And that's one of the things that we pointed out, I believe, wanted to stress in the Arctic Human Development Report, which came out in 2004, that the Arctic is a diverse place. It's full of different cultural expressions and cultural diversity, and gender issues definitely reflect that. I just want to say that that gender issues are probably as important, especially as part of human welfare in the Arctic region, probably as important, probably more important than climate change issues. And I'm actually quoting, this is not original, I'm quoting someone, I think it was a Swedish member of the Nordic Council. They had a meeting here a few years ago, and she said that, I mean, women not wanting to live in the north is a much more serious issue than climate change. In fact, I think there is too much insistence on climate change. Not that I'm a climate change denier or anything of that sort, but as Shari Gearheard pointed out, it is not climate change which is necessarily on the top of the agenda of women or men in northern communities. It's actually how to educate their children, put food on the table, how to health services, etc., issues of human welfare. Now, having that off my chest, I want to provide you with two anecdotes, because they have to do with role models. And I think role models, we've been talking about the role models, actually, I think, a lot during these 2 days. It's a story from an Icelandic kindergarten. 10 years after Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, our former president, had been president for 10 years, and two young children playing in the sand bin, and the boy says, there's a boy and a girl, boy says, when I grow up, I want to become president. And the little girl, his friend, stops playing, looks at him very sad eyes, and says, sort of bewildered, "What? You know you can't become a president, you're a boy." And then, a few years ago, a true story, that was after another president had been in office for about 10 years. There's this man who sits beside a young boy, and they're taking off from Akureyri to Reykjavik on the plane, and on the intercom comes out this female voice as the pilot explaining things. And the man said, well, this boy, he sort of sank down and sighed like this. And so he asked him, what's the matter? Is there anything wrong? And the boy says, yeah, the pilot is a woman. I wonder if she has any idea where Reykjavik is. So, thank you.
Thank you, Níels, and then Birgir. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, big questions very often sort of yield poor answers. So, let me first say that what I have sort of found just by being here these, well, not for the whole 2 days, but what has sort of made me think is the very fact that you have an Arctic dimension to gender equality. Why in the first place? You know, this is for me the sort of the crucial question, because that's not the sort of, it's not the obvious way to look at gender equality. But what I have sort of learned is that in itself is a sort of a benefit that it helps you sort of shake up a little bit your sort of ways of thinking, and look at things from a different perspective. Even just by doing that, that would be sort of a result in itself. But as you mentioned, Ingibjörg, that there are great similarities and dissimilarities that have been sort of brought forth here in the conference. And there's one thing that sort of has struck me when I'm thinking about why should we think about gender equality in the Arctic terms or the Arctic dimension, and this has something to do with the approach and how we deal with change, both natural change and social change. That has somehow sort of manifested itself here. Even these simple little things, like you have in Yakutia, as I understood it yesterday, that the women were sort of being a little bit more progressive. Then you get these disasters, the floods coming, and everything sort of goes back to the sort of normal or the traditional ways of dealing with things. And it's gender, the difference. That's also can be sort of looked at in a more general sort of terms with the climate change and all sorts of changes. And of course, as well, social changes. Which means somehow that the very way in approaching it through the Arctic dimension draws out the necessity, I think, or the importance, or how sensible it is to look at all issues in terms of this gender mainstreaming. It comes so clearly out in the Northwest Territories yesterday that the federal government has this gendered analysis, to everything, but the local government doesn't. And you get, why is this? Why this is, a sort of screaming difference in approach. And I think that also sort of shows us that when looking at the Arctic and gender equality in general, that's what this dimension is teaching us, that we need to sort of address every issue, because every issue is a gender issue in a way. That's sort of the general thing. Then getting to the questions, the small ones that you posed about what are the most important issues. I've sort of been struggling to find what should I say, apart from these big ones. And I thought maybe because I have a feeling that the gender equality issues in the Arctic discussion, which is sort of the approach, it's almost hidden or has been hidden. It's a non-issue. That's something that I felt came through yesterday. That in the sort of wider general discussion, if you like, the masculine discourse or whatever, it's a minority. It's almost a hidden thing. And I think the most important issue, the thing to do then, would be to somehow make this approach and this issue more visible, bring it to the agenda. That's obviously a very important, just to bring it to the agenda is a major step. The second thing which is important that I thought of was maybe that both Kristín and Jón mentioned is the research, that we need more research and more knowledge. And I think we have had, what this conference has been doing is trying to put together all sorts of pieces. We have a very fragmented sort of spectrum of research. We are looking at the different communities, local communities, etc., etc. Everything is perfectly fine and valuable, but I think maybe to connect the pieces and try to put together some sort of a more global picture would be extremely useful at this stage, or as a next step, which brings us to the next question. To sort of increase the knowledge, that would be somehow the most important next step. But how, you asked how, or what are we going to do, or what should be the next steps, how are we going to do it? I just don't know. and I don't know how you would bring the gendered issue in the Arctic discussion more to the forefront. You need sort of a concerted effort through the media, education with governments. It takes a lot of effort. But I think definitely that would be the sort of next steps that it would be desirable. Okay.
Thank you, Birgir, and then Shari, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I had some similar thoughts to what you were talking about at the end. What came to mind for me was what are sort of the bigger issues or the bigger history behind some of the pieces, I guess, that we heard here during the meeting. And it's hard when you have 12 minutes to get across everything that you have to say. But I think, and there was a huge diversity in what we heard in the last few days, but I think behind many of the things are some shared histories or contexts that might be good to get into more deeply. For example, what made me think of it is at the beginning, you asked the question, should we go after oil and gas at all? And so we have these communities in the Arctic that are dealing with the impacts of oil and gas development, but that's sort of one level. But what's behind that is the fact that we're going after oil and gas at all. So there's sort of a bigger issue there. Same, Jack's presentation on suicide was very similar in that suicide was the topic, but behind that is a whole history, a whole psychology, a trauma that he talked about, and is that sort of the bigger context or history that we need to be addressing, that legacy. Another example is food security, which Gunhild talked about, and I'd been doing some work in Greenland recently where we were talking a lot about food security and hunters having a very hard time getting meat, and a lot of it was because of the impacts of climate change, but really it was the imposition of regulations on hunting that was causing the biggest problem. So climate change was sort of one thing, one layer, but they could actually cope with that, which is a reality. The climate change was important, but really it was these hunting regulations and quota systems that were really limiting their ability to deal with it in the first place. And then, of course, climate change itself comes from this bigger context, bigger history. So I guess I was just interested in sort of that idea of what is the bigger story behind some of the things that we heard about. And some of the presentations, like Stephanie's did, I thought, a good job of that yesterday, is really trying to dig into that. And I think that might be a way of kind of unifying some of the pieces that you just talked about.
Thank you. Stephanie, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to start by saying thank you to all of the Icelandic women and men for your brand of Icelandic feminism and your strength. It's very inspiring, and I hope you continue to push forward towards your goals, because I think you're a real beacon in the circumpolar world for what can be possible. And it's such a stark contrast with the situation in Canada, and I think for a number of reasons. One of the, I think, important issues in relation to gender in Canada in particular, and this may not be as relevant in the Nordic countries, is settler colonialism and colonialism. And Jack was talking today about historical trauma, and I have a bit of an issue around using that terminology, and Jack and I could probably debate that back and forth, but in my own work I talk about social suffering, because there's historical traumas, but the trauma is not historical. It's ongoing, it's very much present, and there's all kinds of evidence of that. For example, there's 1,200 missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada today. Every premier of every province and territory wants a national inquiry into why this is happening. They have said it's a sociological phenomenon. There's something going on a large scale. And the Canadian Prime Minister has said, this is not a sociological phenomenon. This is about crime, and there will be no national inquiry. So that in and of itself is an example of that is re-traumatizing for Indigenous women when they have a prime minister who's basically saying, no, we're not doing a very important thing that could keep you safe. So I think, for Indigenous women in particular, that's where the Arctic dimension comes in, because the history of colonization and ongoing colonization, which privileges settler women like myself and other settlers, is kind of the trauma that keeps on giving. And so the experience of gender equality in a colonized situation for Indigenous women who are the object of that, and for non-Indigenous women who have privilege, and many of us who don't practice an awareness of that privilege and try to do anything about it, it sets us all up for a very difficult situation. So for me, that's something that we need to address. And what we're seeing right now a lot of times is governments are putting Band-Aids on the symptoms of that broader situation. They might have a strategy about family violence, but as Soren was talking about this morning, no one's going to the men and saying, what do you need? How can we support you? Because, you guys are very much implicated in this. We're simply not paying enough attention to that. I also think that what's needed, we need more leadership on these really difficult social issues. We need for our elected politicians to start listening to experts. As a community of academics, I think we need to do a better job of mobilizing knowledge, of getting our information out of our research papers, out of our journals, and into the general public, into the hands of leaders. And again, I have to commend Iceland for having several politicians here listening and participating. And where I come from in the Northwest Territories, it's highly unusual for our elected leaders to come to conferences like this, where we have experts gathered together to talk about social, economic, and political issues. And I myself have tried to organize conferences that bring together practitioners and academics, and trying to get our elected leaders to come is like pulling teeth, and they'll come to give their speech, and then they'll go away again. So I think the onus is on us as we go forward as academics. What are we doing to get all of this great insight and information into the hands of policymakers? And there's some excellent examples out there of how this can happen. For example, there's a few graduate students at the University of Toronto and Carleton University. They started a magazine called the Northern Public Affairs Magazine. And it's intended to be for people like us, academics, to get our stuff into plain language and get it into the hands of policymakers. And in the same way, have those policymakers write up about what they're doing, trying to start kind of a conversation. So I think as we go forward, if we want to achieve gender equality, we can have all these great ideas and pour all kinds of money into research and be very sensitive and consult everybody and have all kinds of stakeholders involved. But we need to get to the decision makers. So I would say that there's a big onus on everyone in this room and all the people who've already gotten on flights to go to their other conference to really think hard about that and think hard about how can we do a better job of getting our thinking out to policymakers on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rasmus, you have the last comments.
Well, I think this is a big challenge. First of all, because a lot of the preliminary conclusions have been already taken or made in connection with the different sessions. And then, I think I feel a little bit challenged, especially by the three Icelandic presenters here, because they clearly show why Iceland is a country of sagas, a combination of wisdom and experience that will bring the personal observations also into the discussions we had already in your presentations during the sessions. Actually, a lot of these personal observations, while I tend to rely on, let's say, facts in one way or the other. So now I'll reveal a little bit of my personal wisdom in this connection. I'm in the happy situation that I have three wonderful children who have been traveling with me, living in Greenland, in Canada, in Alaska, and for a point of time also in northern Finland. And of course, it has shaped me, but also them, to, let's say, some of the Arctic perspectives in this connection. And what I would like to tell is, well, first of all, that the oldest one went as exchange student to Tromsø, where she met an Italian guy. And the second one wanted to experience South America, so she went there, got married in Ecuador. And the third one, well, he was born in Greenland and grew up partly in Montreal, but then as a student went to South Africa, where he met a girl. It turned out that she was actually from Jutland in Denmark, but well, Jutland or South Africa, they are different to Copenhagen. But I will especially focus on my oldest daughter and my grandchildren, because she went with her boyfriend and later husband to Italy, where she stayed and then finished part of her education. And at the same time, she got adjusted to the Italian style of motherhood. That is, being in control, and this gentle person who had lived most of her life in kind environments suddenly became a real mother for her husband. And he then went to Denmark and has been staying in Denmark for a number of years, and then they got children. He got a job in Malmö, Sweden, and which is good. No problem with I'm working myself in Sweden. But the point is that they have a very strict regulations regarding parental leave. If you get a job, you as a male should have at least half a year parental leave. And it has been fantastic to see him adjust to having children the Nordic way, having, let's say, the welfare state in supporting his change of how to handle children, which is extremely different to how to do that in Italy. And to me, this just, and we are looking forward to the next children we hopefully will be getting. The first ones are bilingual Italian-Danish. Next one will be bilingual Spanish-Danish. And well, if there are anybody from Jutland here, yeah. But the point is that, yeah, mobility is extremely important, both geographically and socially, in order to adjust to changes in demands and needs. And well, I think I can provide this empirical evidence from my own family in this connection. And we talked about that in the last session, about how then to facilitate this mobility, both geographically and socially. And I totally agree on the conclusions that, yes, we need to gather evidence, we need to make conference workshops where we present findings, but to me, I think living the experiences is the most important issue to focus on. And I'll repeat what I said in connection with my the last session, namely, well, look at how Nordic Council of Ministers are doing this, promoting mobility within the Nordic setting, ensuring that you can actually leave a job, but you will be able to return to the job. And therefore, as part of your life, have the possibility of being mobile and at the same time ensured the welfare state support for doing this. And that's it.
Thank you all for these excellent points. And now, dear friends in the audience, now you have the opportunity to ask some questions, and I would ask you to please keep them short and to the point. And I hope there are some questions. Yeah. And comments, of course, as Jón Haukur reminded me. Yeah, we have a question over there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the comments. But I have a question more to the organizers than to the panelists. But some of you actually represent the organizers. So it's a question of how to proceed. And those who support this conference are the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Arctic Council. And I have tried to find some representatives for them here, but they are not here. So my question is actually, how do you secure that these supportive bodies take in account the knowledge that has been presented here? And how will they proceed further on? Will it take 12 years to the next conference on gender equality in the Arctic? Or do you know if there are any plans how to actually put this issue on the agenda in the future within the public governance, at least?
I guess Jón Haukur.
I can begin, and then perhaps Kristin and Atli from the Gender Equalities Office in the Foreign Ministry can take over. So in the concept document, we put the conference together with a comprehensive follow-up report. We lay the foundation for a cooperation network of the various stakeholders researching, teaching, and discussing and promoting gender equality issues in the Arctic. So that's on the basis of these kind of lines, the Sustainable Development Working Group and the Nordic Council of Ministers accepted and funded and sponsored this. And we don't necessarily see eye to eye on, how big of a publication we should have. For example, I would like to see, we agree, we need to discuss this now. It has to do with the network. A lot of issues, I'm glad actually we didn't get into certain issues that then it would have taken all our time, just like talking about mega industries going into the Arctic, all this testosterone pollution, all these males from the south coming in the north. We could have gone into all kinds of things, anticipating the future, but we have plenty of things to talk about. But the thing is that we need a network and we need publications, I said, because some of us think in terms of there needing to be a report, a concise report, summarizing that can be presented to the Nordic Council, but I think especially to the Arctic Council. I would like to see a more comprehensive publication with the papers. And I'm sure there are some people here in the audience who actually might be thinking that it's possible that a particular journal could publish some of these presentations in addition to there being a concise report. But I will give over to others. Before, back to you.
Well, concerning the Nordic Council of Ministers, there is a new program on gender equality for the next 4 years. There is a ministerial meeting next week in Copenhagen where the ministers hopefully will approve this program. And now, for the first time, gender equality in the Arctic is on the program. And it was the initiative of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs to have this, in Iceland, to have this conference. And when it was introduced in the committee which deals with gender equality in the Nordic Council of Ministers, it got a lot of attention and people were really pleased that this was on the agenda. So we have seen and heard that there's great interest for these issues. The reason why, for example, the Nordic Council of Ministers is not represented here is the meeting of the Nordic Council in Stockholm this week. You know, that's how things happen. We didn't know about that when we decided the dates for this conference. And as has been mentioned, you know, this has been recorded. This conference has been recorded. There will be a report. So it's now up to us to follow up on what we have heard and seen here in these 2 days.
Christian,
do you want to add something?
Can you add something first about the Danish chairmanship? That maybe there could be a follow-up workshop also. If
quite possible. The Danes are taking over.
Yeah.
Will chair the council next year. And their program is ready, but I just haven't looked at it.
Representation from the Arctic Council. I'm working at the Arctic Council along with a colleague of mine from Faroe Island. So the Arctic Council is partly participating here, because what will happen now is that we will take the publication that comes out of this conference into the Arctic Council through the SDWG working group before the ministerial meeting in Iqaluit in April. So, and as was indicated by the minister yesterday, is that Iceland would like to have a follow-up on this inside the Arctic Council. So that's a beginning. So we're going to have to see what comes out of the report and then decide from the governmental side. But it's also our responsibility here to decide what kind of report we want to see, how extensive, and etc. So as Haukur mentioned here, it's a discussion that we need to take, and also concerning a possible network. That's also in the project proposal. So I hope we can have some discussions about these 2 things at least. So, but the Arctic Council is partly here. But thank you.
Okay, thank you all for clarifying that. And I assume there are some questions for our panelists. If you would, yes, Hjalti.
Hello, thank you. First, I thought it was interesting when you were talking about the response of the Canadian government to the 1,200 missing and murdered, that I felt it was a little bit of a feminine approach to research and see what we can do and fix the problem, whereas the government stance was very masculine. It's a crime, we need a hard line, and we have to punish. It was kind of interesting. But Birgir, I think you asked yesterday a question to the panel, something about what you thought was the most important thing. Can you remember how you phrased it? No, neither can I. Anyway, just an observation. I thought, because what has become apparent, of course, is that, like you pointed out, Birgir, that there's a very, very diverse problems we're facing around the Arctic, because there are different communities and peoples, so the problems vary very much. So I was thinking if perhaps from a macro perspective, political representation and representation in the media might be the most important thing. From a macro perspective, we can go all the way down to, like Søren was talking about, pretty much one-on-one to solve all kinds of problems. So there's a lot of ways to solving them. But from this kind of general perspective that if you have representation in the political area and in media, you can raise awareness of all the other issues that we've been talking about. So maybe that might be the most important venue to get these things across. It's just my thought. Birgir, maybe you could respond.
So would somebody in the panel like to comment?
I think we sort of, I agree. I think it's extremely important to get to the policymakers. You get to the policymakers or the politicians more or less through the media, through public opinion. That's the most effective way. But how do you sort of create a general interest in the media for issues of this kind? That can be very difficult. And I don't think, especially when you have, the commercial media, you don't have there are not many people that are going to be advertising or supporting media which is focused on issues of this sort. So it's probably some sort of a public media that you need to get through first. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible. And I think, obviously you would start with as has been mentioned, the academic journals and try and get your foot in there, and with conferences. But I think in general that would be the most effective way. But as I said earlier, I don't know how. Unfortunately, I think that's $1 million question.
This might be a start.
Yeah, this is definitely a start. But there's one photographer here.
There's
no media people.
Yeah, there's a question over there, if somebody would take the mic.
I'm Chris Iversen, and I don't have a question, or it's more of a comment, and maybe with a question. Role models have been talking about, or several people have been mentioned that during the conference. And I think when you talk about how to find means that will make a difference, I think it's important to work on many levels at the same time. And when it comes to role models, when you talk about gender equality, of course you need that for both sexes, or not both, all sexes and everything. But from a female perspective, I think that in Lofoten, where I come from, and Norway being seen as a quite general equal country, in the fishing community in Lofoten, there were severe consequences of the low fish populations in the 80s. And one of the strongest testimonies that I've heard from a woman in this community was a woman that told us that when her husband, he was running a small boat and he had to travel really far out to get the catches, and people were dying out there because it was too far out for the small boats. And she was home with her children. And I mean, this has a lot of similarities to other small communities, other places, even though we are not indigenous people. And it was a storm, and she thought her husband has died, and this was only in the 80s. It's not that far back in the past. And she was home with her 4 children, and she decided that she couldn't keep quiet anymore. So she wrote a note, and because it was going to be a huge meeting of fishermen discussing the politics that they wanted to see for the quotas for the fishermen. And she wrote this note about how we call it in Norwegian svarthav, or black ocean, when there's nothing to fish. And she wanted to put forward how it impacted her as a mother and the community around her. And then she wrote this note and she put it in the trash, and her daughter came and took it up and took it out again and gave it back to her mother and said that, "Mom, you're not allowed to be quiet. You have to tell your story." And she went to this meeting with 200 fishermen, only men, and it was the first time ever that a woman had gone forward in such a meeting. And she gave her testimony, and she couldn't look up because she was so nervous. And when she did, everybody was crying, and she got flowers from fishermen from all over the place. And that was the first time a woman took the responsibility and went up on this stage and gave her testimony on how it affected them as a community, and that it was not only a question about quotas and legislation. And she is one of my role models, and her daughter, that made her come forward. And I would like to see in the proceedings of this important meeting that you also identify role models, because role models are not necessarily something that is, you can't groom somebody to be a role model. But I think that all of the countries in the Arctic and all of the different kind of communities need role models. So I think we should try to identify them and push them forward to lead the way. And salt has been identified as a role model for both the coastal communities and women in northern Norway. And we take that, we've been giving that opportunity, but we will take the responsibility, and we try as often as we can. We talk with young girls and boys. We talk to different decision makers all over the place, and we never rest. And I think that this is such an important question for the future in the Arctic, that we should never rest, any of us. So that was only my comment to this.
Thank you. Would somebody in the panel like to comment on that, or we'll just keep it with us? Thank you. We have room for one short final question. Yes, Marta, I think you were quicker. Okay, I'll allow yours also if it's short. Then that's the final one, yeah.
Yes, thank you. My name is Marta, and I'm here at the Akureyri, University of Akureyri Research Center. What I'm wondering is, we've been hearing about the lack of data in the Arctic, gender-segregated data. So I'm wondering how we can join forces, because obviously a lot of the people here are working in this issue or are interested in it. And I come to it as my background is international development, and although my focus has been on the South, I can see many parallels, and now I find myself here in the Arctic, and I happen to come from the same fishing village as Níels, and I can recognize a lot of the things that have been discussed from a small fishing village, out-migration of women and so on, of young people to the cities and so on. So I'm kind of wondering how we can join hands and continue also maybe collecting data, comparative data across the regions, kind of maybe advertising for cooperation in a way, and how can we get money for this kind of research. And if there will be a forum linked to this particular conference, I don't know, a website where we can put our names and ask for collaboration or something like that. It's kind of just my, what I'm wondering about. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Marta. And I think we'll just leave it with us, and the organizers, I hope, will take it to account when they make the final products of this conference. But the last question.
My name is Maura Hanrahan from Memorial University of Newfoundland. So I live in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I really just have an operational suggestion, and it's that meetings of this nature, it would be really useful to have childcare options, say from 0 to 12. I regularly bring my daughter to conferences, and I would have loved to have taken her to Iceland, but it just wasn't possible. Also, in our Indigenous communities, when we have meetings, there are always children at the meetings, or they're at least nearby. And it does really help you focus on why you're doing what you're doing. So that might be something that we could think about. Tak.
Thank you very much. But, well, there weren't really a lot of questions to our distinguished panel, but so I would like to give them, if they want to, there's no obligation. If you want to give some final comment before we finish the session, we would start, Rasmus, with you at the other end, if you want to.
Well, the only thing I might add are practical, because the Danish chairmanship has a focus in their program for the next year on issues that are very close to this, both in relation to equality, gender, and to development issues in relation to let's say, peripheral areas which include the Arctic, and special emphasis on Greenland and Faroe Islands. So there might be additional funding issues there. And I should add that in addition to that, we are managing at Nordregio the Nordic Arctic Cooperation Program, which also has opportunities for projects related to the issues that have been discussed here. So I think right now there seems to be quite a lot of very good funding opportunities in the Nordic setting. So I'll just recommend the organizers to look into those opportunities.
Thank you. Stephanie, if you want to. Are there any comments from the panel?
No, just I don't know.
Sure.
I was just thinking that it's how to. I've been sort of such a slow thinker that I've been thinking about how these things could sort of gain more visibility, and how you can sort of push this more into the agenda. And then you listen to what's happening with the Nordic Council, and the things that are happening within the sort of public governance things, that things it is getting there. And all these masculine values that we have been talking about, the oil and the mines and the transport and all these opportunities that bring money, they are also issues that are newsworthy. So I think maybe it's important, as I said in the beginning, that if you manage to somehow gender mainstream those issues as well, we can have sort of a tag-along so that we can get into the mainstream discussion with these sorts of issues in the near future, and I hope that will be. And I think that this conference and probably some others in the future will help to do that.
Thank you. Níels or Haukur, would you comment?
Should we make a joint statement, Haukur?
Yes.
Yes.
You can begin. Yeah.
Shall we sing?
Maybe
Shall we
sing.
sing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sing too nice.
What should we sing?
Yeah.
You mean old medieval Icelandic chant?
Yes. You start, I'll follow.
Well, if there was a Sami here, then he would be obligated to sing. But first, may I just say, I think a lot of people in here are thinking about our obligation, what we are committed to doing, that is to create a cooperation network, right? Can I see that? And it was not a fantasy, it was an anticipation, well-founded, that under the Danish chairmanship in the Nordic Council, right? That we will be able to have a follow-up meeting. And if you're talking about a network and a follow-up meeting, then we're not talking about necessarily, like the Northern Research Forum, just always bring new people on board. That is that we continue to hold hands. What do you say? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, so we create a continuous network. So that's what I would like to see happening here. And if you agree, then I would like you to nod your hands because you.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to sing, or should I sing?
I'm not going to sing. Maybe you could call that network the Arctic Gender Circle. And I just want to thank everyone here for an excellent conference. It's been really delightful being here, and all these excellent, sophisticated presentations, giving us the big view over the vicissitudes of our human problems in the Arctic relating to gender. I think many of us have been found it slightly problematic that climate has been such an overriding, almost deterministic issue in terms of Arctic research. I would like to actually see gender become the new climate. And I think there are many good reasons, not least because gender issues are instrumental and key factors in terms of social sustainability of Arctic communities. So these are not marginal, soft issues. These are the hardcore issues we need to understand and we need to promote for policymakers, and we need to do much more and better research on. Thank you.
The Samis often end with a song. Iceland has a unique way of chanting. It's medieval. I've actually come from a musical family, and here's an oath to the north. It's loud. Sorry. Yfir kaldan eyði sandvætnu nótt ég sveima. Nú horfið Norðurland, nú á ég hvergi heima.
Well, thank you all very much. The panel, I thank you all very much, and thank you for participating, and especially Jón Haukur, thank you for that nice chanting in the end.
Jón Haukur, he should have ended this conference. Thank you for your song. Well, on the behalf of the organizers, I just want to thank all of you for coming here to Akureyri. I think these have been very inspiring 2 days. I myself have learned a lot. As I mentioned yesterday, I tend to look at gender equality from this European point of view, the UN point of view, but I think that my focus will change from now on. This conference has been a real eye-opener. I think windows have been opened to worlds that at least I didn't know anything about or very little about, like hearing about life in Yakutia, in the Northwest Territories, in the islands between Greenland and the mainland, and so on. And I think we need to ask ourselves what we know there are the diversities and differences, but what do we have in common? And what we have in common is that we are living here in the northern part, quite far up in the north, in living through long and cold winters with ice and snow, very short but wonderful summers. Most of us have somewhere behind us, or even live in communities of fishermen and hunters, agriculture, and so on. And climate change is affecting and will be affecting us either in a negative or positive way. We don't know yet. We are, at least me, as Auður stated, women tend to see the negative sides, and we know that there are many negative sides of climate change. From the beginning, when we started organizing this conference, it has been clear that this was just the beginning, we tend to form a network, we tend to continue working together. So it's wonderful having seen people in reality, people who are working on these issues from all these different countries. So the question is, where shall we meet next? We'll see. It will be somewhere, someday. So thank you all very much, and have a nice trip home.